I see quite a few people in the room now. I'll start to wish you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to day 2 of the Virtual Community Exchange number 2, 2021. We're still on the screen with each other, but I trust that we're going to have a really good discussion today. So thank you for joining the second day today, and we're opening up with this session on balancing responsible transparency. This session is co-hosted by the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development. There's also an active discussion going on Ayati Connect. You will find a background paper there, and there's already some people who have contributed with their opinions, and it's really interesting to see that the different angles going on there, and I hope to bring in some of those different opinions and angles in today's discussion. But I think today will be a good ground for discussing this in person, but let's not say that this is the end of the discussion. We'll continue also on Connect. So today, to be clear, was that we're hoping that this discussion will allow us to hear oh, sorry, yes, and there's a link to the Yeti Connect you will find in the Zoom. Thank you, Annelise. So we would really like to hear from both publishers and users of data, and the effect that publishing data that may be considered sensitive one day to another, and making it necessary to redact certain data. I think Afghanistan has been an important wake-up call for many of us, but it's regretfully not an isolated incident. We have Myanmar, where that's been necessary as well, and there's been several situations where large or small amounts of data have needed to be changed after being published due to unforeseen political events. So when we talk about open data and transparency, we want to balance that of being as transparent as possible, but in a way to make sure that the data that's published is safe. And so now is a time to set Ayati publishers in a path to a safe publishing of data. And we'll discuss also about roles that different, well, the different actors will have in this. But let's start with some of the housekeeping rules. As with all the VCE sessions, we have simultaneous English, French, and Spanish interpretation. So if you do need interpretation, check at the bottom of the Zoom page where you will find the interpretation button. We will always also ask you to make sure that your Zoom name displays your name, your full name, and what organization you are with, so that we know who's in the room. There is going to be the possibility for questions and answers in the chat, but we also want to have the participants active today. So instead of just typing your question or comment or suggestion or experience in the chat box, you can flag if you would like to also speak your point, writing out verbal. and a brief nature of the question. So, but unless it's your turn to speak, please keep your microphones muted. Otherwise, it can be a little bit busy on the sound. We'll start off hearing some brief remarks from our speakers, and then we will spend some time in a discussion with each other. So you will have plenty of time to engage and raise points and questions. And since responsible transparency is such a complex topic, we are eager to hear from all of you, and especially like the diverse opinions and approaches and strategies you may be employing as a data publisher, and also concerns as data users. But first things first, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have Andie Vaughn and Larsen, both representing the United States government. And together they are both members of the US Foreign Assistance Data and Reporting Team, a team which jointly governs the publications of US foreign assistance data across all federal agencies. And Andie represents the US Agency for International Development Bureau for Policy, Planning and Learning, where she focuses on improving aid transparency and accountability across USAID. Rozanne represents the US Department of State's Office of Foreign Assistance, where she leads a diverse team of state and USAID employees who are responsible for ensuring foreign assistance is well-designed, measurable, evidence-based, and transparent to demonstrate results and accountability. Together with us today, we also would like to introduce Stuart Campo, who leads the data responsibility team at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs at UNOCHA, the Center of Humanitarian Data. In this role, he oversees efforts to advance the safe, ethical, and effective management of data within OCHA and to promote data responsibility more broadly in the humanitarian system. And I'm really glad to have him with us today, as going into the humanitarian more detailed data does raise a lot of concerns about information safety. So hopefully he will be able to speak from his specific experience. Finally, to introduce myself, I'm Melinda Kassner. I have been working with Ayati pretty much since 2009. I work for SIDA Sweden. I'm the Ayati manager there. I also sit on the Yeti governing board, where I occupy the technical seat. And as a transparency advocate, I've run across these questions about information security quite often and more, especially being in an organization where everybody was used to working in closed systems, and then suddenly we went to open data. So I'm really glad for this discussion here today. For the first portion of the session, I'll turn it over to Larsen to begin. So Rozanne, if you're ready, please step in.
Thank you so much, Melinda. That was a fantastic introduction. And I'm so excited to be here. This is actually, it marks about a decade of the US government publishing US foreign assistance data to the Ayati registry. And that really demonstrates the US commitment to transparency, while also, equally important to us is engaging with the data users and data publishers in the Ayati community. So I'm very excited to be here. this is a big part of the day-to-day work of my team is, how do we actually make sure that we are making our data available to the broader community and doing it in a safe way. So opportunities like this event to share ideas and learn from each other is just absolutely invaluable, particularly on topics as complex and nuanced as that tricky balance of data transparency while also protecting the safety of our implementing partners in the field. And I think that Melinda, already spoke well to this, but really this is one of the biggest challenges that we face is that question of responsible transparency. And in recent years, we've all seen that we've had to wrestle with this question a little bit more frequently than in the past. How do we prioritize open data with responsible data? And how do we protect sensitive information for the safety of local implementing partners and allies, because that's of the absolute utmost importance to us, and I think to all of us in this community. And it's a priority both in the pre-publication process, as well as what we're realizing more and more in the post-publication process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on today. But we also have to find a way to honor, the guiding principle of, at least for the US foreign assistance data, we always say that it is a presumption in favor of openness. So what we mean by that is that we're truly committed to transparency, and that is rooted in a belief that greater transparency supports improved coordination, improved learning, improved effectiveness. It really invites analysis. We bring more brains into the game to look at what we're doing and to help us think how to do it better. And the more people who are thinking about that, the more people who can analyze our data on a global scale enhances our opportunities for learning and improving. And of course, always for us, it's also an issue of wanting to have the best accountability possible to the taxpayers, since every dollar of US foreign assistance is taxpayer dollars. So really, it's their money. They want to see where it's going. So we have this deep commitment, both from a perspective of improved transparency that supports learning, as well as we feel accountable to our taxpayers. And guiding us in this effort of having a presumption in favor of openness are a number of key laws, policies, and guidance that provide safety provisions, which outline requirements for data reporting, transparency, and what is allowed to be redacted. So on the screen, you kind of see some of these key laws outlined, and I'm just going to go over them very briefly because we're not here for a legal lesson, I'm sure. But we have multiple mandates that govern both the publication of our foreign assistance data, as well as guide us in what is allowed to be redacted in that data. So you can see that the details of each of these mandates as they relate to publishing and protecting data on the screen. So the history on this is that in response to the Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness and US G8 and G20 commitments, the US really began to require federal agencies to provide and publish US foreign assistance data on foreignassistance.gov over a decade ago, to make this information more transparent and compatible with international standards. So several US laws determine how the US reports on foreign assistance and what redactions are permitted. So the very first one goes all the way back to 1974, the Privacy Act, which guarantees individuals the right to be protected against unwarranted invasion of their privacy. So this is mostly looking at personally identifiable information. So we are required to work with the people who are submitting their data. We are the publishers for the US government. My team and the team that Andie works with at USAID, we jointly work together for that publication process. But we are getting submissions of data from across the federal government. Over 20 departments and agencies in the federal government, in the US federal government, actually implement foreign assistance. And so they report their data to us. And before doing so, they are required to remove any personally identifiable information. And then fast forward all the way to the early noughts, and the Office of Management and Budget issued a bulletin, which is a type of policy, and they it was created to really further the value of data transparency, to make a statement about we are committed to continuing to publish data on foreign assistance, but also do it responsibly. So it outlines principled exceptions for when data can be omitted from publication, in addition to the personally identifiable information. And that was also reinforced. Those principled omissions, those principled redactions, were reinforced by two pieces of legislation: the Data Act in 2014 and the Foreign Assistance Transparency and Accountability Act, FATA, which I always get confused with the region in Pakistan. Totally different things. But anyhow, those two pieces of legislation, the Data Act and FATA, both aligned with the OMB bulletin to say what we could redact for. So the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, also known as Data Act, said that we had government-wide responsibility to publish data. So this was not just about foreign assistance, and to ensure that it is consistent, reliable, searchable, and this was specific to financial data. So once the US government had made an obligation or had actually expended funds, those are financial data, and those must be published across the entire federal government. We are publishing that. We are meeting that requirement through foreignassistance.gov for all US foreign assistance. And then when FATA was passed in 2016, it said this is specific to foreign assistance, and it codified the practices of redacting and protecting sensitive information. The two key provisions which aligned with OMB 1201 was that we could protect also not just PII, but again, to protect the health and security of implementing partners or program beneficiaries. So that's redaction subject number one, and allowable redaction area number two is to protect national security interests. Now, in practice, these legal mandates enable the USG to act as swiftly as possible to redact certain data elements where legally allowable, in the event of an emergency where our local implementing partners or beneficiaries may face imminent harm, such as recently in Afghanistan, or a little bit further in the past in Burma. There's a big role in this, though, for someone who's not here today, which is the data, we consider the data owners inside of the US federal government. They are the ones who, again, submit their data to us for publication on foreignassistance.gov to meet those requirements of all those laws I just talked about. And we are the facilitators who publish US foreign assistance to Ayati as well as other places. But those data owners, when they submit their data, are the ones who are actually responsible for making the redactions which are allowed by law. So they, before submitting their data to us, need to comb through it and remove personally identifiable information. And they need to make a judgment call, because they're the ones closest to the actual programming, to determine what information maybe needs to be redacted in order to protect the health and security of implementing partners or program beneficiaries, or to protect national security interests. The way that that is communicated to those data owners for them to guide their redaction process is that they should really, again, getting back to that presumption in favor of transparency. And so, we ask them to only truly redact if they think that it is presenting one of those harms. And so that data reporting process, to elaborate on it a touch more, is that they submit their data to us every quarter. We do a quick check for making sure that there's not double entries or accidental transcription errors. They've added a zero, dropped a zero. Lots of things can happen, as you all know, when you're transferring data between 20 different federal agencies. And we also do a quick check to make sure that, to the extent that we can, that the redactions which need to be made have been made. They are our partners in determining which data elements may require specific redactions, and ensuring that those redactions are only made to ensure transparency is balanced with safety. And then when we get, that's all in the pre-publication world. When we get to the post-publication, they've already gone through their thoughtful redaction process. We've published it on foreignassistance.gov. We've submitted it to the Ayati registry, to OECD DAC, et cetera, et cetera. Then something changes. The context on the ground changes. There's a coup. There's a change in government. And that change in context introduces new risks that weren't there at the moment of pre-publication redaction. So this is what we're talking about today, is that emergency redaction. When crises emerge, the US government works swiftly to provide interagency data owners, we go back to those data owners, with guidance and technical support to consider if and when nuanced redactions need to be made. So we take an immediate action, as you may have noticed, in the aftermath. Our team, the facilitators, the publishers for US foreign assistance, took down large swaths of data to give those data owners the time to do that thoughtful redaction process again in the post-publication setting after that context had changed. And this is all about mindful redactions. When conducting redactions, rather than simply removing all the data associated with certain activities, which we had to do in that emergency temporary redaction process, the data owners actually can go through and do thoughtful, mindful redactions. In the meantime, our policy or approach is that the US will still publish all of the dollar values for transactions, but you just might not see all the details below the dollar lines. So the total amount of foreign assistance obligated or total amount of foreign assistance expended will always be there and available. You just might not be able to see all of the details about where it was spent, who received the funding, or for what purpose potentially. And then as they go through those mindful redactions, then we can add those details back in if it's deemed safe by the data owner, the people who are close to the actual programming. In closing, just want to say that our two teams, my team at the Department of State Office of Foreign Assistance and a couple of different offices at USAID, work together to continually try to improve our internal processes in close consultation with all of the interagency data owners. And this really, looks like just everything that bureaucrats do, right? We establish internal standard operating procedures, we develop guidance documents, we do trainings, we consult with the data owners to ask and answer questions, and we try to work together to improve the transparency of foreign assistance data while still, importantly balancing safety. So this is something that's our day-to-day bread and butter work, and we're so excited to talk with you guys about it. And through all of that work that we do with the data owners, at the end of the day, we have these policies and laws that guide us, and they've been in place for many years. But we still remain interested in learning and improving our practices to continue to ensure that we're open and responsible to data transparencies in the year ahead. So, we're just very hopeful that our commitment to responsible data can help inform how other countries and organizations balance that, and that we can also learn from other countries. So thank you very much for your time. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague at USAID, Andie Vaughn, for a closer look at a third-party visualization tool that hosts Ayati data. Over to you, Andie.
Thanks, Anne. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Andie Vaughn. I'm from USAID's Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning. And there, as part of my role, I manage an internal to USAID redaction tool for our foreign assistance data publications, as well as the policy that governs everything that we take out of this data before it goes to domestic websites, as well as the Yeti registry. But I also manage, and this is what I want to talk about briefly today, is a development cooperation landscape tool, which is a visualization of Ayati data that USAID created for USAID staff, as well as other US government staff, but that we made publicly available. The site provides visualizations as well as a query and search tool for Ayati data. So Zan touched on this a little bit earlier, but as part of our policy that governs redactions from a US government perspective, what we would consider post-publication redactions of foreign assistance data are allowable for domestic websites as well as our Yeti publications when there's significant changes in country. So a coup, a change in law, or other significant changes occur. Unfortunately, those changes used to be, or we thought they were, historically rare. But in the last couple of years, our team has really seen an increase in the need for these post-publication redactions. and the review of data prior to it going out the door, it's now not sufficient. Significant political changes occur, and then we're stuck scrambling to remove data. So obviously this is concerning for our own data and for our own data publications. But as the manager of a third-party visualization site, this really leaves us with questions and concerns to walk both that fine line between transparency and responsibility to ensure the safety of those we serve. So the landscape tool, for a variety of technical reasons that we will not get into in this conversation, it does not refresh daily. It refreshes every couple of weeks. And so when there is a significant change in country, when there's a need for these post-publication redactions, we of course want to ensure that we're not visualizing information that is going to put partners, programs, or beneficiaries at risk. And so on this tool, we have the ability to remove very quickly our own data, but really we're not sure, we're not always sure how to handle other folks' data in such a situation. So during recent political events, our team made the executive decision to just hide full country pages off of this site. We wanted to make sure that we were masking information that we suspected that other publishers and organizations might be in the process of redacting. But given the fact that our refresh, wouldn't happen for 2 more weeks, we just hid full pages. So we were correct that many folks were in the process of redacting information. And we just want to reduce risk and minimize harm. However, there is not necessarily best practice on this, and we're really just trying to be responsible stewards of Ayati data. And so we made a lot of internal and independent decisions without consulting this community. We didn't consult other data publishers. We didn't consult the tech team. We just hid pages. And so as part of this community, we're really seeking today and during this conversation to understand what are other owners of visualization sites doing? How, if you are a data publisher, if you're a data user, what would you prefer to see on visualization sites such as this one? And we really welcome this discussion today to see if we can find concurrence around guidance or best practices for these visualizations and query tools, so we can address these challenges head on. So with that, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to Stuart to share his perspective. Stuart, over to you.
Thanks so much, Andie, and thanks to the organizers for having me today. It's exciting to join this discussion and to see both from the background materials and the discussion in your forum how advanced the community is already in thinking about these issues. What I wanted to do for this initial conversation is just share a bit about data responsibility more broadly in the sector, and specifically some of the sector-wide frameworks that we've helped develop and are now supporting the adoption of, and then speak a little bit more specifically to how we can think about sensitivity of Ayati data and how the community approaches this. So on the screen, you see a couple snapshots of key guidance documents that we hope can be useful resources for the Ayati community in navigating responsible transparency. On the left, you see the recently endorsed Interagency Standing Committee's operational guidance on data responsibility. This document is the first of its kind in the sector and took over a year to develop through a process that engaged over 20 organizations, including members of the IISC and other humanitarian actors, as well as over 250 humanitarians around the world in different response contexts. We jointly led the development of this process as the Center for Humanitarian Data because we saw a gap in terms of the individual policies and guidance that was available at the organization level, and then the sector-wide guidance, which really let's say, left something to be desired in terms of clarity, particularly on sensitive data management beyond the management of personal data or personally identifiable data. I think that's one really important touch point with this conversation. Some of the decisions that publishers and users of Ayati data are making are easier when it comes to the obvious removal of personal data. But when we start talking about non-personal data that may still be sensitive or demographically identifiable information that could be included in reports, both for effective affected populations or for organizations serving populations on the ground, it becomes harder to navigate and really becomes quite context specific. So this sector-wide framework is really designed to support operations and colleagues working in different environments in deciding together, first of all, what constitutes sensitive data and different levels of sensitivity, and then how to support the safe, ethical, and effective management and sharing of that data to support the aims of the response. At the level of OCHA, we've developed our own internal data responsibility guidelines, which we're now just finalizing a revision of. We released a working draft in 2019, really to support OCHA colleagues on the ground in navigating these issues. And that then led to the process that yielded the ISC operational guidance. We've now revised the document that you see in the middle of the screen, and we'll be releasing that in the coming weeks, really to reflect both OCHA's support to the implementation of the sector-wide framework, but also to account for some of the more recent issues that other speakers have mentioned. Again, the goal here is supporting field level colleagues in making decisions with their partners about how to responsibly manage data with a bias towards sharing. I think that's the other key point to make about not only the guidance that exists, but also the general approach to data responsibility. It often in the past was a conversation of really focusing on mitigating risk and mitigating risk alone. And that was not a particularly productive approach. We really want to take a balancing of consequences approach, looking equally at the risks and benefits and understanding how we reduce risk while maximizing benefit, which I think is actually part of the title of this session. So it was nice to see that balancing approach. That's really how this work has to be done. Just quickly to move to the next slide, I wanted to share one example of how some of the work we're supporting could feed into the discussions this community is having. So one of the key actions within the operational guidance and also within our own guidelines, and please excuse my dog, if my colleague Stephen Flower is known for cats, I am known for my data dog Zelda, who seems to be wanting to join the conversation. We're working from another colleague's apartment in Amsterdam today, and she's very excited about joining the discussion. I apologize for that. So on the screen, you can see the cover of a recently endorsed information sharing protocol for the Somalia response, as well as, I realize the text is too small to read, but I'll share the link to the document, the data and information sensitivity classification that's part of this protocol. The reason I wanted to show this example is that this gives you a sense of how this isn't just a binary, sensitive or not, and it's also quite granular at the level of a response, how different actors are thinking about what constitutes sensitivity and how to then share that type of data responsibly. So in this protocol, you'll see, for example, that 3W or 4W data, which would include who is providing what types of assistance in different parts of the country, is considered with an asterisk as low or no sensitivity. That asterisk, as you'll see in the protocol itself, mentions that for certain types of assistance, like protection programming, this type of information might be of higher sensitivity, and that actors should be aware of that nuance when navigating whether and how to share data of this type. Similar data points would exist in Ayati data in terms of who is providing what types of assistance in different parts of the country. So this could actually be a helpful reference to data publishers publishing data about programming in Somalia based on analysis in the context. This protocol was developed by OCHA Somalia and its counterparts in the Intersector Working Group and the Information Management Working Group. This is based on a very recent analysis of data sensitivity in the Somalia context, and I think can serve as a useful reference and example to how operation level strategies around data management and sensitive data management can inform some of these more global conversations. So with that, and at the risk of farther barking, let me hand back over to Melinda for now, and then happy to dig into some of this in more detail later in the discussion. Thank you.
Also, thank you, Stuart. I actually appreciate the dog coming in a little bit as an icebreaker, and speaking of icebreaker, I would like us to go into a discussion in the room. But before beginning our discussion, we have some brief polls that we would like you all to answer. After that, we'll go into the questions. There's been some questions in the chat also that we'll get to. But first things first, the first question to the group is, who do you think is responsible for protecting sensitive data? It's only one choice available. So who's the primary responsible for the data? Is it the data publishers, Ayati, or both data publishers and Ayati, if you want to choose both then? And we have a winner. Most answered the data publishers at 67%. Nobody answered Ayati being the sole responsible. But we have also 33% that say that both data publishers and Ayati are responsible. That's really good. So I think we should bring that into the discussion later and to see like in what way and why this is something that we should consider. And the second poll is, how can publishers better protect sensitive data? And I can't see that it's come up yet, but it's an open response question. Oh, sorry. It my bad. So please answer in the chat what you'd like, how publishers better should protect their sensitive data. So please respond to the entire group in the chat. We'll look those through when we have our discussion as well. But now let's go over to the discussion. But before we move into it, we'd like to note that if there are other topics or areas you'd like to address aside from these questions, please don't hesitate to jump in or to add it to the chat group. You can also use the raise hands in the Zoom. I will try to see everybody's there. I think I can start with a question that was earlier on to Zan from Lucretia from UN Women, if I don't remember wrong. Okay, I see one hand up from Johanna. We'll get to you. So the question to Zan was, how about forward-looking information? Are you also publishing that on behalf of agencies? And I assume that is a question to the data redaction.
By forward-looking information, I'm assuming you're talking about the budget data, so what we're planning to spend, rather than what was obligated or expended. Is that correct, or were we talking about something else when we say forward-looking information?
Yes, about the budgeting. Yes, thank you.
Okay, that's what I thought. I'm like, I don't know what other forward-looking information we have. Although I guess you could say strategies are forward-looking. And you will find on foreignassistance.gov links out to strategies for every element of the U.S. government that implements foreign assistance. So that's kind of a separate answer. But for budgetary data, which we have kind of two main phases of our budget in the U.S. government. There's the budget request, where the executive branch puts together all of its hopes and dreams and sends it up to Congress, and then waits for them all to get smashed. And then, so that's the request. So you'll see on foreignassistance.gov that you can see in the drop-down menu of our data, both in the visualization as well as in the downloads, budget request. And so those are the executive branch's requests for what we want to spend money on. And then you'll see a different budget category of data, which is budget allocations or appropriations. I can't remember which one we ended up titling it, because it's what is appropriated by Congress. And then we actually allocate that country by country.
Sorry, if I can cut in here. I'm afraid we're not going to have time to go through all the questions if we get into so much detail.
Sorry. Okay.
It's really interesting, and I'm actually really glad that there's to get all that information. But I think we can continue on Ayati Connect for these. And Johanna, I see your hand up, but we have some questions also that are coming up. I'll get to you. So being mindful of time, I'm going to ask us to be a little bit brief with these questions and to use this as an encouragement to go on and speak on Ayati Connect about this. So the first question is how have other publishers of all sizes and capacities approached redacting or protecting sensitive data in emergency situations? And if we have anybody from a variety of publishers, that would be great. I see a hand up from Michelle from IOM. Is that to answer the question?
Yeah, I pointed, I answered something in the chat just to answer question number 1, in that we ask our project developers when they're developing projects to tell us whether or not they think it should be excluded from Ayati. And then we have a secondary review right as we're going to publish to have our thematic specialists make sure that the things that the project managers didn't catch, that in fact it is okay to put things out in publication. What we find our biggest challenge in is that the people that are the project developers don't always understand Ayati. We have a fact sheet that lists out exactly what data points are out there. Oftentimes for us, they're confusing beneficiaries in the terms that we use them, which is an individual migrant, with the data in Ayati. And so we tell them there's no biometric data that's going to get out there. It's not in our world. We're not looking for that. So it's a lot of the times people are saying we have to redact. And then when we explain exactly what's out there, they are like, oh no, it's fine. It's all good. So we don't redact that much. And there's nothing across the board. The big challenge for us is what could be sensitive in one country is not sensitive in another. We have projects specifically working with former combatants, and in some countries, nobody wants us to put, the government that we're working in doesn't want that information out in the public eye, and in other places, they're fine with it. So we can't put an across the board rule in place. We have to look at it almost on a case-by-case basis. But so far, we've been pretty good with it. Even to speak to the USAID and implementing partners, we did review already published Afghanistan data when everything was happening. And the only thing we found we ended up redacting was in some of our descriptions, we had listed specific places within the country that we were working in, and we took that information out. It's a problem for us. We know that the users of the data, particularly in the benefiting countries or the partner countries, they want to know where within the country. I always hear the Nepal example of, when the earthquake happened and everyone said it was happening in Nepal, the Nepal government really needed to know where exactly within their country that took place. For us, that's our biggest struggle, because we know that the government wants to know where in the country it's taking place, but oftentimes that's actually the sensitive piece of data. And so we are very particular in those cases as to whether or not we are referencing the subnational location in our descriptions. We don't yet include geolocation data on our project locations, so that isn't a challenge, but even referencing it verbally inside of our descriptions, we have to be very careful there. Over.
Thank you, Michelle. I see Johanna's hand up there, and this time I'll let you in.
Thank you. Yes, I had raised my hand actually to answer that question. I just wanted to share, actually, I wanted to share that we, like others, I think we ended up just pulling a bunch of information preemptively from our Ayati file, but also from our website. And wanted to remind people that a lot of information is also in information. So we've been talking a lot about data and about our Ayati data sets, but there's also a lot of information in documents that can be published. And in our case, we did realize, for instance, that we really like to talk about our local partners, and that can be a problem when circumstances change. And it takes a lot of work then to go through documents and sift them and make sure that we remove those references. And going forward, that will be a challenge to think through how much, I'm thinking about evaluations. We need to say who we interviewed, because that gives credibility and legitimacy to the conclusions of evaluations. When presenting a project proposal, who was involved in the consultations and who contributed to setting the priorities and the objectives, it really matters. At the same time, then that can become a problem down the road, again, when contexts change. So to some extent, I'm sharing this to remind everyone that it's not only about the data, that we need to also think through some of the other information that we share, where there can be information that can be problematic for and can be it can put people's and partners' safety in.
Good thing that we should look beyond just data. We haven't. If we go on to the second question, should Ayati provide additional information or guidance to publishers in regard to what types of sensitive information they might consider excluding from their Ayati data sets? So now we're going back to the role of Ayati, and here, Stuart, yes, please.
Thanks, Melinda. I wouldn't deign to answer whether Ayati should, but if I could rephrase it as how might Ayati provide additional information or guidance, then I'd be comfortable to answer. I think, as a number of people have mentioned, the context specificity of data sensitivity is a real challenge for a global community and a global standard and a global framework for managing these issues. So to a certain extent, there's a limit to what kind of guidance Ayati can provide. A few things might be interesting and kind of resonate with the way that we have approached this as the center. The first is making sure that people are aware of any context-specific frameworks or protocols that exist. And that's actually something that we could work together on, because we're trying to put more visibility on those protocols. Like the one that I shared as an example from Somalia, there are at least 10 countries with information sharing protocols in place at that system-wide level for the response. And these can be really helpful navigation tools for global data publishers who are publishing data on a specific country context. So that's one way, maybe just making that more visible, sharing with your community how these protocols might apply to some of the data types that are being managed or potentially redacted. Another would be to compile a set of sort of standard types of potentially sensitive data in different types of environments. So in a natural hazard environment, data sensitivity is quite different from a conflict environment, and the same data points that might be perfectly fine to publish in a natural hazard context would be highly sensitive and need to be withheld or redacted in a conflict environment. So I think, again, that's something that we've been really learning by doing and trying to provide guidance on, is sort of general categories of sensitivity, things that could be sensitive in different contexts, just so that there's more common understanding and a common approach, to a point made by one of the participants in the chat, that it's really a collective action problem and there is a need for consistency. I think consistency is the final point that I think there's a role for Ayati to play, also just given the nature of this group and the great work that you've done around this global standard, looking across activities perhaps to see what decisions different publishers are making, and whether you have certain data points being shared in a context by some of your publishers, but not others, not monitoring that, but simply understanding why, sort of taking a couple country examples and understanding why those decisions are being made, maybe engaging in a conversation with your community, and then taking some decisions about how to provide more consistent guidance on that moving forward. So just some thoughts on how you might tackle this, and happy to continue the conversation on how we can support based on our experience at the center.
That's really good. And then thank you for giving an example for a way of solving it, if that's a way forward then for Ayati. I do want to hear a little bit also from the ones who thought it is the responsibility of the publishers and Ayati, so if there's anybody who would like to share their opinion there. While we're waiting, I know that some secondary users of data have redacted data for the publishers. We have, for example, with the EU's data, they redacted information, and if Renate is here and would like to broaden a little bit how they thought about what they were thinking. We heard from USA that they gave the publishers a little bit, or the agencies a little bit of time to see over their data, and we want to know, is that the same purpose from EU side?
Hi, thanks a lot, Melinda. In fact, Marie had prepared something, but I don't think she is with us yet. Indeed, we do have the, Maria, are you with us? No, okay. We do have the EU Aid Explorer, and when we decided to take off or to hide the Afghanistan data, for ourselves, we of course also wanted to do it for the visualization tool we are hosting for the whole EU and all the EU member states. But as we feed the visualization tool ourselves, we didn't really have to ask the member states. We just hid the information for Afghanistan. So we decided ourselves. It's a bit like what the colleagues from the US explained, that they decided not to show the page, and we took the same decision because it needed to go fast. Thanks. Marie, do you want to compliment?
Yes, sorry. Hi, I was just in the waiting room, and I'm just joining now. Which question exactly are we on at this moment? Sorry.
No, just how EU, the reasoning for EU to I will correct them, not redact information, but hide information from Afghanistan. And because we've heard about that USAID, they redacted data to give the different agencies time to review their data. And is that the same reasoning that EU had, or are there other considerations that you made?
Yes, thank you. So I was actually here for the beginning of the presentation. So thanks very much also to USAID. And we're speaking in the chat also with Renate that we had a very similar system in place, both prior to publication and also sort of the consultations that we went through in this emergency situation that we were suddenly in. We were really like acting in terms of urgency at that we couldn't have, the risk was too high in terms of protecting our implementing partners on the ground. So yeah, it was a very quick decision that we took in consultation with all of the different DGs, the Humanitarian, DG and other GGs that are working together with us, and as well our thematic colleagues, our geographic colleagues, and our more technical colleagues working on the data. And now we are as well going through, I think, as Renate mentioned, on the EU8 Explorer, to see, is there another way that we can go about this now, to make sure that we're still providing as much information as possible, but that it's not at risk for our implementing partners on the ground.
Thank you, Marie. Well, we're running out of time. I don't want to put anybody on the spot about sharing their opinions about the role of Ayati. I am, however, would like to hear about that. But I think all of us want to hear more about the different experiences and different considerations that we can have moving forward. And I would really suggest that you join us in the discussion on Ayati Connect. I will be summing up together with USAID some of the comments here, and I can't promise that I won't be the devil's advocate in a couple of questions and pose questions, and I hope to see the same kind of interaction there as we have here. I would also welcome the consideration of data users. I see here that we've got Stephen and Mark in the chat, and they usually have that perspective. Oh, I'm not going to be able to read that and sum up. If you can be brief, Mark, I will let you in and make your case.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Melinda. Yeah, so there was a call after following a recent crisis to make sure that tools were updating as frequently as possible, basically to make sure that changes to what publishers were choosing to publish were reflected as quickly as possible. So we made quite a lot of effort to make sure that Data Store Classic was updated every 6 hours, previously every 24 hours. The same with the country development finance data tool, now updating every 3 hours compared with 24 hours before as well. And we also thought about whether we should have some kind of stronger response. So, removing data for a particular country for a period of time. But we thought that it made more sense just to kind of reflect publishers' own choices about what should be published. But if there were, if there was a need for other kind of guidance or general rules there, then that's something that would be good to discuss as well.
Thank you. And it's also good to communicate that Ayati has been refreshing the data more frequently to pick up on the changes of data that publishers have made. So with 3 minutes left, oh, I see Michael McDonald has his hand up. I will let you in briefly. Just remember, 2 more minutes.
Thank you, and I will. I'll be very brief. I do think that when crisis hits, that everyone sort of scrambles and looks for guidance. So to question 2, additional information and guidance, what Stuart said I think applies. I won't say that we should, but it would certainly be helpful. And also to have a community where all organizations can go to look at guidance that agencies and other development partners are using. I also think that this decision should be as local as possible, meaning local implementers, the ones who are actually on the ground, should have good input into, a lot of input into what actually is sensitive. I really like the matrix that Stuart shared. I think that that's quite useful. And as far down the line, as grassroots as we can make that information, that would be very good. But at some point, there has to be an overall arbiter of standards, and Yeti can serve in that role. And I think that would be constructive. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Michael. And we have a couple of comments and questions in the chat box. I won't be able to sum them up here, but we will bring them over to Ayati Connect. And if you have the time, I do encourage you to read what your colleague participants have written there. And oh, we get to see the dog also. There's a face picture.
She wanted to say hi and thank you for the great discussion.
You, Zelda. Well, I look forward to the continued discussion and to seeing you in the afternoon sessions, or well, for me, evening, and for somebody, nighttime. Thank you for this session, and you'll have a 15-minute break until the next ones. And I hope you've picked out a nice one. I had a really hard time, so I'm looking forward to the video recordings to be able to watch everything. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Yes.